All right. Hi, world. Hi, YouTube. Here with another video. This video probably going to be the first video that I may upload to a new channel. Still deciding as to how I'm going to figure out all that good stuff. But this video is definitely dedicated to some sort of field of, we'll call it science. Anyways, we are here to try to figure out, better understand what the F is a mathematical model of military armies and operations. And the ones that I really want to turn to is really those of the Eastern Front of, we will say namely World War II, but it doesn't really have to end there. And this is something that I've been brainstorming for quite some time now. I'm not alone in this, but I can certainly say that it's been an interesting journey, and the more I think about it, the more I realize that we could be onto something. But it definitely requires more analyses, to put it lightly. And so this is going to be the first of what hopes to be many videos that are directed towards this form of analyses. So first of all, I kind of want to just talk about, give it some titles, give it some labels, if you will, for the sake of just basic comprehension. And the idea is that we're trying to, like I say, model at least the World War II Eastern Front in some mathematical way, and see if we can just gain a little bit more insight. But it doesn't have to stop there. In fact, I have reason to believe that this so-called data analyses may actually really encompass more of the 20th century and maybe a bit of the 21st, perhaps, than just the Eastern Front. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to stick with what I know today and move along. And so what I have in front of me is actually a YouTuber by the name of Oliver Lugg. Hope I'm pronouncing your name right. I'll put a link down below. But he is talking about the Foundation series, which is a book written by Isaac Asimov. It is one of the coolest stories I've had the honor of reading about. And let me just go back in the video. And let me see. There it is. There is Harry Seldom. He's a fictional character, of course. But essentially, for any science fiction fans out there, we're talking about the Foundation series, which is probably Isaac Asimov's most well-renowned work. I believe it's probably his most well-renowned series. And in it, you basically have a world where there is essentially different groups of, we'll call them scientists, mathematicians, those kind of folk who ultimately are trying to predict the rise and fall of human empires. And in the whatever time frame it takes place, far in the distant future, humanity has 25 million habitable planets. And in essence, they're trying to predict the downfall of the human empire. And it's a very fascinating analysis. Isaac Asimov, as many of you know, is a very clever fellow, and he definitely a futurist and was definitely just brainstorming a lot about what he could envision the future being like. So he's talked about all kinds of cool things, but I think the most interesting thing that I've gained from just following him is essentially this field of mathematics that is established in the science fiction world, and it is called psychohistory. And if I do a quick Google search of what psychohistory is, essentially it's a amalgam of psychology, history, and related social sciences and humanities. Its proponents claim to explain the why of history, especially the difference between stated intention and actual behavior. I would almost argue that it's really more of the how of history. And part of it is trying to understand from a mathematical perspective why is it that there's been trends that we've seen in this large colony of humans, right? The same way, biologists can find mathematical patterns of, say, ant colonies. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to figure it out with human colonies. But of course, I'm saying human colonies, but I really mean just human civilization. But the point here is that we're trying to model history in some way, and we want it to be ideally consistent in the same way that you can use, calculus to measure, physics, Newtonian physics. You can measure fluid mechanics. You can measure aerodynamics. Pretty much any other field of science, you're basically able to make predictions of the future in some sense, of the future of a body of objects, we'll say, using the math. And this is why we have all these powerful simulators and whatnot that engineers can use to model machinery or buildings, you name it. And so I'm going to really just turn my attention to Oliver Lugg. Check out this video. I'm still not even done watching his whole video, but this guy he understands category theory, which is like a very high level of mathematics. It's like the math of the math, apparently. I've tried to understand it myself. I'm still working on that. If anyone wants to help me be a tutor, feel free to reach out, because math is hard. I thought I was good at it, but man, once you get past calculus, man, you start entering some pretty whimy-timey waters, and it is just a lot of information to process. So, still trying to learn my own mathematics, but I love Oliver Lugg. He's spent a full hour-long video just breaking down, is it predictable? And that's the question he's asking. Foundation: are we predictable? Is human behavior mathematically predictable, or predictable in such a way that it can be mathematically modeled? Okay, that's the point that we're trying to make here. And so he actually introduced me to a field of science that I haven't heard of until today, and it is called Cliodynamics. And I'll read to you what the Wikipedia says. It says, Cliodynamics is a transdisciplinary area of research that integrates cultural evolution, economic history / cliometrics, macro sociology, the mathematical modeling of historical processes during the longue durée, I don't know if I pronounced that right, and the construction and analyses of historical databases. Cliodynamics treats history as science, and I think that's the main takeaway for me, folks. Being as someone who has spent a lot of time studying the hard sciences, I did chemical engineering for university, and I found myself just unfulfilled. And I think the reason why is because I'm still, I don't like to use the word humanitarian, but I love studying human beings. I love the human connection, right? And in that sense, big shout out to a person like Lex Friedman, because he seems to get the both worlds, right? The both hemispheres. He seems to understand the hard science, as a computer scientist, but he's also really interested in just the kind of the more human, the things that make humans unique. And we can call it emotions, perhaps. We can call it intuition. We can call it, perhaps sensations. There's something about human nature, and dare I say even consciousness, that makes humanity unique. And we're still trying to figure that out. But at any rate, I think history, the thing that I've always found lacking in history is insufficient data. And I know that most historians, they think differently. They're not necessarily the most mathematically intensive people, but they're able to still find incredible insights. They have incredible intuition, and they're able to find patterns in very remarkable ways. So a big shout out to all the historians, because they somehow know information. I don't know how they store information in their minds so well. It's really impressive. Oh, excuse me, as I have freaking eyelash here in my eye. Excuse me. So, point I'm trying to make here in this video is going to already be pretty long, so we'll see if anyone even watches the video. But the point I'm trying to make here is that, we're trying to make sense of cliodynamics, right? And so my area of interest is really military history. And I've been just really into World War II for quite a while, but also the Cold War. I spent a lot of time in museums looking at the Cold War. But the point I'm trying to make here is that military history, to me, seems to be just such a ripe environment to apply data analyses to history, because the military statistics kind of takes its own sort of world. Because when you study military battles, anyone out there who's into military history, that one of the areas that got you interested in the first place was probably the tactical stats of different machinery and vehicles, tanks and aircraft. And then maybe you got more interested eventually into like the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of troops that were deployed, casualties, the structures of divisions, structures of infantry, formations, etc., etc. So I think World War II, for me personally, is is the one for me, because it is such an industrial war, and it was a such grand scale that, I mean, there's just so much data to explore. And of course, the Cold War that followed, but World War II was the hot war, if you want to call it, that preceded the Cold War. And so, having said that, I feel like there's a place to explore, basically trying to do some form of data science, perhaps Cliodynamics on World War II military history. And I think this is where a lot of my work is going to be dedicated to. So with that said, there's a gentleman, Dmitry Shevsky, who wrote an article here called the Causes and Mechanisms of the Ukrainian Crisis of 2014, a Structural Demographic Approach. I've just started to read his paper, and it is a scientific paper, so it's one of those heavy papers. Got the abstract, intro, conclusion, all that good stuff. And I'm still in the intro, but basically he made the point that some theories that were well-established theories that were applied to model or predict the Russo-Ukrainian war that's happening as we speak, still ongoing. Apparently they failed. And I think this is the little part that I found that stuck out to me right here. It says the social sciences have not generated, I think he's mainly talking about economics, many general theories to explain the sources and mechanisms of political crises. Some of these theories, like rational choice theory and physical military theory, have failed to predict outcomes in the same conditions. Okay, and so that kind of caught my attention. Okay, this gentleman, Peter Turchin, is the gentleman who I believe is responsible for exploring or establishing this Cliodynamics. And so I think he is somehow involved in this sort of research. I'll keep you updated on that. But I did a quick Google search on what even is rational choice theory. Speaking as a scientist, the thing about theories in science is that we're getting to a point in the 21st century where we literally have so many theories. So many. I'm sitting here just simply asking for the one theory of the universe. And unfortunately, there's just so many. And so, what is rational choice theory? It actually goes all the way back to Adam Smith. Adam Smith is the one who, he talked about the invisible hand, but I think he pretty much established the basic economic model that most people know of today. When you think about capitalist economic theory, if you want to call it that. There's another one though that there was here, physical military state theory. Not really sure. I pulled up the Wikipedia page on it, but I didn't really, it's not very long. But apparently it also has not worked in trying to describe what was happening in 2014 with the situation in the Ukraine that eventually led to the war that we're at today. So all that said, I will elaborate a little bit more on rational choice theory. It is a framework that states that individuals behave according to their own self-interest. Right, I think that's the kind of the foundation of the competition of capitalism, something like that. And so that's that. Point I want to make, and then this is really where my video is gonna kind of tangent off. But when it comes to trying to understand something like the Russo-Ukrainian war, I really turn my attention to trying to understand Russia, and I really try to turn my attention to trying to understand the Russian army. The Russian army is an old army. It's been around for a long time, and it's gone through some notable changes. And the thing about the Russian army is that I would argue that many of its pivotal shifts occurred in the lead up to World War II, really during the rise of communism in Russia, or AKA the Soviet Union. And when you look at World War II, there's still things that just don't make sense. How was it that they have this sort of stereotype of having very bad infantry, and yet they still found a way to win the war? I think the Soviet deep strategy to waging war actually proved to be extremely effective, and eventually was, I think, the reason why the Soviet army was successful at defeating Nazi Germany at Moscow, at Stalingrad, at Kursk, and eventually, was able to just be one step ahead of the German high command of the Second World War. And unfortunately, when you look at the more tactical level, things are just very murky and very confusing. And so these stereotype of just kind of this, what I would call a ghetto army, whereas a lot of things are improvised, a lot of equipment is failing, maintenance is kind of could be better, to put it frankly. This has been a well-established part of like the culture, it seems like, of the Russian army, and you see it in so many videos and so much footage, and yet they still find a way to continue being effective. And so this is very relevant, I think, in the conflict today, because you can see so much of this. I mean, so many people expected Russia to clean sweep Ukraine. It ended up being just big old traffic jam for Russia, and even now it's hard to say, despite all the casualties that Russia sustained, if really Russia is being able to sustain this war or not. So I definitely would love to see the conflict come to a peaceful resolution, of course, but we're simply not there yet. So with that said, my area of interest is just trying to explore this strange phenomenon of these different armies, and I think just given the scale of the Russian army, especially during World War II, the Soviet army, and just seeing its different levels of hierarchy, because we're talking about such a large army that really, like, it's almost like multiple organizations stacked on top of one another. It may even be that the infantry, which is a fundamentally different hierarchy than, say, the Soviet High Command or something like that. And so I have a few more things just to show you, some photographs to kind of paint the picture. But this is a Russian army. It's 1945. They're invading Manchuria. So here you see Soviet infantry. These are the Soviet elite. Okay, these are the battle-hardened troops. These are the ones that successfully took Berlin in 1945, and now they're attacking Japan in Manchuria to end the Second World War. But you can see that already half the troops, it's a standard that most Russian infantry don't have standardized helmets. They wear these little caps instead. And then furthermore, these Russian helmets are like super thin, not very effective, right? A few other photographs. Here's one, Kursk machine gunner. You can see that all these troops don't have any headgear, okay? And there's something that I have heard of, and I'm we're obviously speaking off the top of my head here, but basically, you hear about how, like, the at least during the Second World War, the Russian army had a much easier ability to survive off of the mainland or off of the environment than their counterparts. They consumed less logistics, while the good old stereotypical Ivan the Terrible, which was what the Wehrmacht pretty much described the Soviet infantryman to be, was this very thin, pale Siberian soldier who was eating cabbage as their primary diet, and somehow this soldier was more terrifying than any of the other modern armies that Wehrmacht was fighting in the Second World War. And that's very interesting, because how is it that you have such malnourished foot soldiers who often their casualties tend to be extremely high, and yet they have this reputation of being very tenacious and very aggressive. So I find that just very intriguing. This is all from Wiki Commons, right? And I mean, if you ever spend some time on this, if you anyone out here who's just interested in the aesthetics of, the communist armies, you're gonna find that there's just all kinds of strange equipment. There's the pizza gun, right? The DP, and you can just see that. You can tell that the infantry are somehow poorly equipped, it seems like, and yet they eventually found a way to defeat what many would argue was one of the most effective armies of human history, the Wehrmacht. But that's a whole another debate. But I just find it just sort of, there's just some sort of paradox here that I'm just not fully able to understand as someone who's been studying World War II for at least as a hobby for like at least 10 years. I mean, I've been into World War II since like middle school, and I can tell you now that I just still don't get it. I just don't get it. So there's something to explore here, folks. And what I'm really hoping that this channel and in any future videos that I decide to make, what I really hope we can do is just shine some light on this. And so I'm basically just digging around, doing research, and seeing what happens. So, these are Wehrmacht troops. You can see, like, right, these Wehrmacht troops. The Wehrmacht army was not as well equipped as the Western armies, as the United States Army or the British Army in the Second World War. But you can tell that they kind of had more standardized uniforms, more standardized helmets, all that kind of stuff. But for some reason, the Soviets just never really seemed to prioritize that, and yet they still had this well-renowned army, and this reputation would carry on throughout the rest of the Cold War. And so this is very relevant today because so much time is spent trying to gauge the real strength of the Russian army, and it's hard to say. It's very hard to say. And so with that, I think, this paper is super interesting because it's relevant to 2014, but somehow it really echoes, all the way back to something like the Second World War. And so I do think that, somehow by studying the Russian army in particular of the last 100 years, it's going to help gain a lot more insight into the so-called mathematical modeling of military armies, given how large they were, given how many military operations they were involved in, but also given how bizarrely structured they were. They don't really seem to be kind of like your typical army, and given their scale. So with that, there's definitely a lot more exploring to do. But if you enjoy this sort of information and you want to support any of this future work, I probably have to actually do more work before I'm asking for anything. But in the meantime, definitely please comment below if you have any insights, any military historians out there, please. This is an ongoing project. So thank you for watching, and peace out.